Thank you. I hope I can get through this speech tonight. I'm not sure my voice is going to hold out. I'm not as young as I used to be, but we'll try. As some of you know, I'm a retired lawyer. I practiced law in Jeffersonville for 42 years. That was from 1965 to 2007. And I was 70 years old when I retired 14 years ago. I'm privileged to have been a graduate of Jeff High School in 1955. I graduated from IU in 1959 with a degree in political science. And I graduated from the IU School of Law in 1965. And I never thought I was going to return to Jeffersonville, but I did. And I was very fortunate. Jeffersonville was very kind to me. I had another career, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. My dad put me in the Army Reserves, U.S. Army Reserves in 1954. And from there until 1959, I was an enlisted man. I was on active duty from 1959 to 1962 as a tank officer, as a fixed wing pilot, a fixed wing instructor at pilot, and a combat infantry officer. And I was in the Indiana National Guard from 1962 to 65 as both a fixed wing and helicopter pilot. So anyway, I did have a commercial FAA ticket, but I never used it. And unlike the lady that I was just talking to, I'm not a trained historian and I'm not a professional writer, but I am a wordsmith because wordsmithing is my tool of trade. And so I do pride myself on words. I don't any longer pride myself on speaking. My talk tonight is based upon a part of my biography on Davis Floyd, written after I retired in 2007. I am married to Laura's stepmother, Janet Shane from New Albany. We've been married 40 years this summer, and I'm 84 years of age, 83, I'm sorry, Laura. Bob, I'm going to make a little alteration in my speech tonight. I hope you don't mind that. I'm adding some things that aren't in my transcript that you were kind enough to email to everybody. By the way, if anyone wants a copy of my Davis Floyd biography brochure, I can mail it to you, but you'll have to email your address, name and address to EW Smith37, Ernest William Smith, EWSmith37@gmail.com, and I'll send you a copy of that brochure. Okay, first I'm going to say a few things about Thomas Jeffersonville's namesake, Thomas Jefferson, and how he was linked to slavery.
What the?
Oh, well, let me mute her.
I just muted.
Kill it, whatever it is.
No, it's crazy. Okay, I'm going to get out of this.
Are we, can I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, first I'm going to say a few things about Jeffersonville's namesake, Thomas Jefferson, and how he was linked to slavery. His first wife was Martha Jefferson. She died, and then he started a sexual relationship with Sally Hemings in France when she was 14 years old. She and Martha were blood half-sisters. They had the same father. I don't know how many people know that. Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia said on the issue of slavery, he said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." Jefferson was opposed to slavery in the Northwest Territory and was very active in the Northwest Territory in keeping slavery from becoming a real reality in the Northwest Territory. Second, I'm going to say a few things about the 4 federal trials in connection with Aaron Burr's so-called conspiracy on the Western frontier at the time. The speaker last month talked about the canal that was proposed to be built in Indiana, and also about the Aaron Burr conspiracy and about Davis Floyd's plea of guilty in Jeffersonville. But I want to tell you, there were 4 trials concerning Aaron Burr in the West, and the first one was in Frankfort, Kentucky, which was the capital of Kentucky in 1806. And that trial was in November, December, at the exact time that Davis Floyd was in the territorial session of the House of Representatives in Vincennes. And the grand jury did not return an indictment and said there was absolutely no evidence in the Kentucky district that Aaron Burr and a man by the name of John Adair had done anything that was criminal or against the laws of the United States. So that's the first, no indictment against Burr. And the 24-member, it was actually the 3rd grand jury, but they could find no evidence. And they went out and looked for evidence. They found no evidence. The second trial was in the capital of the Mississippi Territory in February 1807. Again, the grand jury found no evidence in the Mississippi Territory of any evidence of treason or anything else. And so Burr was found not guilty, no evidence in Kentucky, no evidence in the Mississippi Territory. But General Wilkinson caused him to be arrested and taken to Richmond. Now at Richmond, he was indicted. The petty jury and the grand jury, by the grand jury, and the petty jury found him guilty of treason. But the judge ruled after the trial that, I'm sorry, the law doesn't support a verdict of treason. So Burr was not. Floyd was actually charged in the Mississippi Territory. He was never found guilty. Floyd was charged in Richmond. He was not found guilty of anything. And so in the summer of 1807, he becomes clerk of the Territorial House of Representatives. And he has, the trial is still going on in Richmond at that time. So he goes into Judge Davis in Jeffersonville and pleads guilty. The 2 judges didn't think he was guilty. The Attorney General for Indiana didn't think he was guilty, but Floyd was religious, and I think he pled guilty out of religious concerns. And Harrison later offered him a pardon, but he refused to take it. So anyway, I know a lot of people think that Davis Floyd was a bad guy because he was found guilty of actually a high misdemeanor, had nothing to do with treason in June of 1807. So anyway, that's a little bit about I'd like to talk about Davis Floyd's youth, which ran from about 1774 to 1794, his early working life, which ran from about 1794 to 1812 or 13. He married in 1794, he married a 14-year-old pregnant widow, and then adopted the son the next year in 1795. Floyd moved to southern Indiana in 1800 along with his family. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the struggle that occurred here in Indiana and who were the primary participants in this struggle. Here are their names. If you recognize any of these names, I'll be surprised if you don't. William Henry Harrison, he was the governor of the Indiana Territory beginning in 1800. Benjamin Park, for whom Park County is named. He was the Attorney General. Later, he became Knox County's member of the House of Representatives, and then he became a delegate to the U.S. Congress. Next are Charles Beggs, James N. Wood, Davis Floyd, Reverend James Lemon Sr., John Badolay, John Beggs, James Beggs. You notice there are 3 Beggs brothers. All of these people, now Davis Floyd was from Jeffersonville. Reverend James Lennon was over in New Design in the Illinois country. The New Design was kind of a community like New Harmony, except New Harmony came on along a lot later. Another man was Abraham Little, John Owens, and Robert Robertson. Now, the last man I want to mention that I'm going to be talking about is General Washington Johnston. Now, he was the postmaster in Vincennes. He was a lawyer in Vincennes. He was a Mason in Vincennes, and he was an anti-slavery man in Vincennes. Although he was involved in a case in the Indiana Supreme Court in 1817 that some people say was a slave case, but it wasn't a slave case. But that's another story for another time. Okay, were there other significant men in the area? Have you heard of Sergeant Charles Floyd? He was Davis Floyd's younger brother. Have you heard of Sergeant Nathaniel Pryor? He was Davis Floyd and Charles Floyd's first first cousin. Colonel John Floyd. Some people think Floyd County is named for him, but it's not. Colonel George Rogers Clark Floyd. He led the Army regulars in the Battle of Tippecanoe. Dr. and Virginia Governor John Floyd II. William Floyd Tooley, one, and then William Floyd Tooley II, who's a former New Albany resident. In fact, it was Tooley's family history about the Tooley family that I discovered, and it was written in 1906, published here in New Albany. I discovered that Floyd County was named for Judge Floyd, Davis Floyd, and Davis Floyd was its first circuit judge. Although Davis Floyd never lived in New Albany, never lived in Floyd County. He was a circuit judge. He lived in Cordon. In fact, the house that he lived in is still there on the square, as some of you know. And it should be named the Floyd home, not the Hendricks home, in my opinion. Okay, you probably all know something about the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. It was an ordinance or a law adopted by the Continental Congress in 1787. We're not sure who its author was, but I'm sure Thomas Jefferson influenced the language in it, because Article 6 provided that slavery and involuntary servitude was prohibited and illegal in the Northwest Territory. Now, the original states in the Northwest Territory was not Washington and Oregon and California. A lot of people think, it was out west, but it was Northwest in 1787 because it was the land that George Rogers Clark conquered and became American property. And the original states were Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota. And when the Indiana Territory was formed, Ohio was not part of the Indiana Territory. And then in 1805, Michigan became a territory. Okay, you understand what the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. As I said, the Indiana Territory was created in 1800, and it's all the states I just mentioned except Ohio. And the governing document for the Indiana Territory, like its constitution, was the 1787 ordinance. And during the first 5 years of the Indiana Territory, it was run by the governor and the attorney general and 2 judges. They fulfilled all of the legislative, administrative, and judicial functions. It was kind of like a monarchy. Those men were a small council of men that ran the government. And they did a lot of things that turned out to be inappropriate. So I'll get into those. Okay, what actions were performed by the governor, the attorney general, and the 2 judges during the first phase of government under the 1787 ordinance? Okay. In 1802, there was a convention in Vincennes, and a petition was sent to the U.S. Congress to repeal or nullify Article 6. There was a group of men from Clark County that filed an anti-slavery counter petition, which was sent to the U.S. Congress. And then in 1803, the governor and judges enacted a Virginia slave law in the Indiana Territory. Now, probably that slave law was legal here in Indiana because nobody ever challenged it. And in 1803, a U.S. congressional committee in the capital city, Washington City, recommended against the repeal of the Article 6. And there would be 5 more committees that would deal with the slavery issue here in Indiana. But anyway, this congressional committee, headed by a Southerner, recommended against the repeal of Article 6. But then the next year, in 1804, another U.S. congressional committee recommended the suspension for 10 years of Article 6. So at the beginning of 1805, there is a Virginia slave law on the books of the Indiana Territory. There has been a convention vote in Vincennes recommending the repeal of Article 6, and 1 U.S. congressional committee has recommended against repeal, while another has recommended a 10-year suspension. And in the meantime, the U.S. Congress has taken no official action on any of these recommendations, but there is a Virginia slave law on the books in Indiana in 1805, from 1803 to 1805. Okay, in my research on this slavery issue, I found excerpts from Reverend Lemon's diary. And believe it or not, President Jefferson had sent Reverend James Lemon Sr. to New Design in the Illinois country to spy on Governor Harrison, Attorney General Park, and their cronies who were agitating for slavery in the Indiana Territory. And I've discovered several of his diary entries, and he was really upset at Harrison. And he was really working with churches and other groups in the Indiana Territory to keep slavery out of the territory. Now, there is no evidence that I found that he reported to Thomas Jefferson, but I know he did. You know, when I spoke a little while ago about the trial in Frankfort, the U.S. attorney in Frankfurt's wife was a sister to John Marshall, who's a Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I know she was writing letters to her brother about Burr being on trial in Frankfurt. I mean, I'm just sure. But of course, those letters were destroyed. They never showed up. but I know that John Marshall knew everything that was going on in the Kentucky court in the fall of 1806. Okay, now the Indiana Territories enters into the second grade of governance. So the Indiana Territory converted to the second grade of governing with the same governor, Governor Harrison, but an elected 5-member House of Representatives. Now we're talking about the Indiana Territory, not up in Washington City. The 2 judges are gone from this tight-knit group that controlled the state. But of course they remain as federal judges in the territory. And there's also an appointed legislative council. Davis Floyd is elected because he lived in Jeffersonville in 1805. He was sheriff of Clark County to the House of Representatives from Clark County. And he was identified at that time as an anti-slavery man. Now, A.G. Parks, Attorney General Park, is elected to the House from Knox County and is identified as a pro-slavery man. Both he and Floyd are appointed to a Indiana Territory House Committee to review the slavery issue. This first session of the First General Assembly met in the summer of 1805 in Vincennes, and I'm sure it was hot there, just like it was hot in Corydon in 1816. Floyd is there, but somehow a petition is sent to the U.S. Congress for the second time, and another congressional committee in 1806 recommends that Article 6 be suspended again for 10 years. Now, I mentioned John Badelet. John Badelet was the Register of Lands in Vincennes. He came there in 1804, and he was appointed by Thomas Jefferson. John Badelet grew up in Switzerland with Albert Gallatin. And if you don't know who Albert Gallatin was, he was Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury. So Badelet and Albert Gallatin were very close friends. And there's a book of their correspondence that I found, the first time I found it was over in the Filson Club. But anyway, John Badelet wrote letters to Albert Gallatin. And he said in one of his letters that the influentials in Vincennes are lobbying the U.S. Congress for slavery in the Indiana Territory, and that they were bringing to the Indiana Territory their prejudice and fondness of the southern states, the evils of slavery. So there was a pipeline that ran from Badelet in Vincennes to Albert Gallatin in Washington, D.C., and then to Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson knew what was going on in the Indiana Territory during this period, 1802 to 1808. Okay, what happened next? Well, in the second grade of government, Davis Floyd attended the second session of the First General Assembly from November 3rd to December 5th, 1806. Now, I said before, Lewis and Clark were in Vincennes on October 30th, 1806, and were at Locust Grove on November 9th, 1806. And in early 1807, another petition would wound up in the U.S. House of Representatives, where another U.S. House Committee recommended that Article 6 be suspended for 10 years. Now, Park has gone in Indiana from the Attorney General to a House member to a Congressional House delegate and then he became the chairman of the U.S. Congressional Committee that made the recommendation that Article 6 be suspended for 10 years. So the proof is very strong that Harrison, Park, and their cronies were very active to impose slavery by law and through petitioning the U.S. Congress to have the Article 6 either repealed or suspended for 10 years. Okay, also that year, another Virginia slave law was put on the books by the General Assembly. I don't know how many people know this, but on March 7th, 1807, the U.S. Congress enacted a law outlawing the importation of slaves from the foreign shores to the U.S. And as we know, slaves were first brought from the foreign shores to America, and specifically to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. 1 year later, the Mayflower and the Puritans arrived at Plymouth Rock. That was in 1620. Okay. I'm going to take a drink of water. My voice is getting a little weak. Just be patient with me. I'll finish this story. I want you to think it's Saturday, October 10th, 1807 in Springville, Clark County, Indiana. 7 men are present. One is from Jeffersonville. His name is Davis Floyd, and he is the secretary of the meeting. The other 6, and I've mentioned these men before, the 3 Beggs brothers from Charleston. And by the way, David Lewis, a lawyer from Charleston, his father was Jim Lewis. I talked to Jim's wife one time, and I don't remember which of the 3 Beggs brothers was one of her great-greats. Another of these 6 men were Abraham Little, John Owens, and Robert Robertson. John Beggs was the chairman of the meeting. Charles Beggs, if you remember, and James N. Wood were at the 1800 convention as delegates from Clark County. Some historians say that Davis Floyd may have been at the 1802 convention, but not as a delegate. But he was at the 1805 first session of the General Assembly and the second section of the first General Assembly. And he was also present at the first session of the second General Assembly. These men had everything covered. They knew what had been going on in the Indiana Territory on the slavery issue, and it was very fraudulent on the part of Harrison, Park, and their cronies. Now you say, can you prove that? Read my biography, chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. I document everything with the first sources that I could find. Okay, what action did these 7 men take and what happened? They issued a document that was described as the Clark County Anti-Slavery County Counter Petition. It was signed by John Beggs as chairman and Davis Floyd as secretary. This counter petition said, among other things, that the 1802 petition filed by Harrison and his cronies was not approved by the delegates east of Vincennes, that would have been most of southern Indiana, and that the 1805 petition was not approved by the majority of the General Assembly. In fact, if you try to go back to find the minutes where that petition was approved, those minutes are missing from the official records. Now, the counter petition found its way to the U.S. Congress. I think Davis Floyd took it up by horseback, and to another U.S. Congressional committee that recommended on November 13th, 1807, that it was not expedient at this time to suspend Article 6 of the 1787 ordinance. Okay, what else did the October 30th, 1807 counter petition? Now, I suspect that counter petition, it's in official territorial records, but I would like to think that the original of that petition is in the Library of Congress. Now, I've never tried to find it. That was always on my bucket list, but I've never done it. But anyway, this counter petition also said in parts, as to the propriety of holding those in slavery, whom it hath pleased the divine creator to set free. Two things in that tells me that these men were God-fearing men, and they may have been Quakers with the use of the word hath, H-A-T-H, whom it hath pleased the divine creator to set free, seems to us to be repugnant to the principles of a republican, and that means an anti-monarchy government. And it also said the toleration of slavery is either right or wrong, and it is inconsistent with the principles on which our future constitution is to be formed. Your petitioners will rest satisfied that at least this subject will not be taken from our citizens until our statehood constitutional convention can occur. And it finally did in 1816. So I believe that had it not been for these Clark County men opposing Harrison and his desire to establish or impose slavery in the Indiana Territory, that Indiana could have wound up as a slave state. And because of all the French occupants who owned slaves over in the Illinois country, it is likely that in 1808, when the Illinois Territory came into existence, it would have come in as a slave state. People say, oh, that couldn't have happened. But what happened in 1820 to Missouri? It came in as a slave state. What happened to the Arkansas Territory? It came in as a slave territory. And so it could have happened. Now, the other lands in the north of the Missouri, there's the Missouri Compromise. You remember that from history? That came in, those territories were, or those, that land was supposed to come in as slave territory. But Jefferson was protecting Indiana, but when he was gone, the Indiana Territory, but when he died or got out of office, there was no one there to protect it. Okay, what did John Badelet say to his friend Albert Gallatin in a letter dated August 8, 1808? He accused Governor Harrison as the leader of the scheme for the introduction of slavery into the Indiana Territory. Okay, was General Washington Johnson pro-slavery or anti-slavery? He was anti-slavery because he issued a report as the chairman of the Indiana Territory House Committee that said, slavery cannot and ought not be admitted into this territory, and that the 1805 Virginia slave law ought to be repealed. Okay. Did that end the discussion of imposing slavery in the Indiana Territory? In my opinion, it did. To me, it's safe to conclude that slavery was dead in the Indiana Territory forever, or was it? What were the final words from Badelet to Gallatin about the slavery issue? He said, this was in 1830, he said to his friend Albert Gallatin, and by the way, after Gallatin left the position of Secretary of Treasury, he was an ambassador to France, and then he was ambassador to England, and then he became president of the Bank of New York. He had a very notable career. But anyway, Badelet said to his friend Albert Gallatin, I have no other share in keeping slavery out of this state than the other well-intentioned men, I love that word, well-intentioned men, in efforts to resist the great influence of the governor and his Prime Minister Park over the population of this part of the territory. And this part of the territory was southern Indiana. And we already know who the well-intentioned men were. I hope you realize who they were. Okay, now let's turn to the rest of the story. Does anybody have any questions at this standpoint, or is it appropriate for you to ask me questions? What time is it? I've been going for 30 minutes. You know, I'm trying to rehabilitate Davis Floyd. Now, eventually he lost his militia commission. He was a captain, then a major in the Indiana Territorial Militia. He was a Falls of the Ohio River pilot. He lost his commission there, and he lost his clerkship in 1807 in the Territorial House of Representatives for his anti-slavery sentiments. No questions? How many people are out there? Or still out there?
We got 25 or so.
Okay.
Listen, they can come on with, Diane, are you there? Yeah. They can come on and issue questions via chat, but I suggest we go on with your presentation.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of running down.
Okay.
And so what I'm going to do, you know, I was going to tell you the rest of the story, but what I'm going to do tomorrow morning, Bob, I'm going to send to you a transcript of the rest of the story. And if you'd be so kind to send that out to the membership, then they can read the rest of the story. And you know, I talk about the fact that, among other things, Abraham Lincoln was in Vincennes at the light with his father. Abraham Lincoln and his father were in Vincennes in 1830 in John Batelay's office, and I often wondered whether John Batelay took care of their business. Tom Lincoln moved his family to southern Indiana in 1816 after Indiana became a state because the Constitutional Convention in 1816 adopted the same slavery language that was in the Ordinance of 1787. In fact, that language is in our Indiana Constitution today, the same language that was in the 1787 ordinance, Northwest Ordinance against slavery, is in our Indiana Constitution today. If you don't believe me, look it up. And it was the same language adopted in 1816. And guess who the men were that were at the convention in Cordon in 1816? Davis Floyd was there as a representative from Harrison County. James Lemon, now I think this was probably Junior from the Illinois country, was one of Clark County's representatives there. Now I think it was his son, and you know his son was an advisor, a mentor to Abraham Lincoln. So, but anyway, Thomas Lincoln moved his family to Indiana because slavery was illegal in the state, in the brand new state. And number two, land titles were more secure than they were in Kentucky. And I'd like to thank my ancestor, Hayes McCallan, who founded the little town of Palmyra, which is, you all know where that is. He moved into what was then, what later became Palmyra in 1804. You know, I would like to think he moved from Kentucky, that he came for the same reasons, but I don't know that. Let's see, who else was there? Oh, John Batelay was one of the representatives from Knox County, I'm sorry. And believe it or not, Benjamin Park was there in 1816 from Knox County. But he had a change of heart. He had switched sides. Now, who else was there? Oh, there's a name, New Harmony. There was a reverend from New Harmony that was very anti-slavery, that was there at the convention in 1816 as a delegate. Can anybody remember what that name was?
Was it Owen?
Huh?
Was it Owen? No.
No.
I'm getting that messed up.
George Rapp. He was, let me see, Reverend Frederick Rapp from New Harmony, representing Gibson County. This Rapp was the adopted son of Reverend George Rapp. George Rapp was the CEO. Of course, they didn't use that terminology then, but his adopted son was Reverend Frederick Rapp, and he was one of the members of the Constitutional Convention. And all those men had been involved in fighting slavery in the Indiana Territory between 1802 and 1808, except Park, and he was on the other side. But when it came time to vote on slavery in the Constitutional Convention, it was a done deal. Slavery had been defeated by the citizens of the Indiana Territory, not by the U.S. Congress or by Harrison. Now, by 1812, Harrison left Indiana. He went to Ohio to seek his fortunes elsewhere. And of course, you know, he was a 30-day president of the U.S. elected in 1840. And by that time, his admin said that he was always an anti-slavery man. Of course, we know better. Okay, questions?
I guess I have one. Did you say that Susanna Johnston Lewis Davis was 14 when she married Floyd?
That is a disputed, that's what I said. That is a disputed issue, but I contend that. And
I would love to hear evidence.
Go
ahead.
Read my biography.
I will. I intend to. I am General Washington Johnston's 5th great granddaughter, so I'm interested in that family. So.
Yes, she was General Washington Johnston's sister. And I found a deed over at the Pilsen Club to that effect. It was a deed. I guess somebody died. She was married to a Lewis. Do we know who that is?
I could get it for you in just a second. George W.
Was he related to Meriwether Lewis?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
Sure.
Everything I've said this evening is documented in my biography. Carl Kramer up in Jeffersonville told me, he said, Bill, you didn't write your history or your biography as a historian, but you did write it as a lawyer, because I documented everything, and lawyers are required to document everything in legal briefs. So my story is documented. Now, did Floyd own slaves? Probably did. Did the Floyd family over on at Floyd Station in Louisville own slaves? They probably did. I know Floyd, as sheriff of Clark County, returned husband and wife slaves to the Louisville jail because he was ordered to do so by the federal court in Jeffersonville. And as sheriff, it was a federal law that it was his duty to return. But Floyd was an anti-slavery man from very early on. And he was very religious. You know, Floyd went to Florida in 1823. He was appointed a land commission judge down there in the brand new Florida territory. And he served 3 years in that position. Then he became treasurer of the Florida territory in Tallahassee. I think he died and is buried in a cemetery in Alachua, Florida. The cemetery is named the Newtonsville Cemetery. And it was on a turnpike in 1831 when Floyd died that ran from St. Augustine through Newtonsville, now where Alachua, Florida is, up to Tallahassee. And the reason I think he's buried there is I don't think they'd have brought his body back to Indiana. I'm not even sure they would have taken it to where he lived near Tallahassee. And he was a Methodist lay preacher. And the first Methodist church in the Florida territory, when it was in Newtonsville. I think he's buried there in an unmarked grave. And talk about the turnpike. You can stand in front of the marker where the Methodist church is, and you can see the roadbed of the turnpike come right up in front of where the Methodist church and the cemetery were located. Plus the courthouse was located there in 1831. Any other questions?
Bill, you mentioned the Thule family.
Yes.
Did they have a connection to Springville?
You know, I think they did. And
Because I've been told that it was called Thule Town before it was Springville.
Tullytown or Tullytown?
yes.
It'd been an Indian village, and then a French trader put a post there.
Might not be the same name, but there were other Floyd families that did live in southern Indiana at a time back in that period of time. But I'm not an expert on Springville, except I've driven by. Is there a marker there?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay. I thought there was, but I could be wrong. It's not far from where my friend Judge Fleece lives, who's also a historian like me. Well, a wannabe historian, let me say that.
That want to do a dig there.
What's that?
People that want to do an archaeological dig there, but it would take a lot of permissions.
Okay. Have you seen that movie, The Dig?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that movie. That was a great movie. What a story. It's a novel, but what a story. Hey, okay.
It's based on fact.
Yes. Any other questions? Oh,
I
you
can
know,
make some comment on Tullytown or Springville. It was Tully, Tulley maybe, or just Y. I thought it was said more Tully.
Gentleman was French supposedly, and it was Thule, but everybody called it Tully.
Yeah. And it's on High Jackson Road.
yes.
There's a bend in the road, excuse me, with where Botteroff Cemetery is. You can look that up.
Butt off.
Yeah, that's pretty much where Springville was located at. If you want to find it on a map, a little bit easier. But if you look on High Jackson, and there's like the road goes like straight, and then it makes a 90-degree turn, and then it makes another 90-degree turn or something, and it goes straight towards Charlestown. But we have stuff on that at Charlestown Library.
You know, I would like to see some part of your organization do the genealogy on each of those well-intentioned men that were part of that Clark County Anti-Slavery Committee to find out what their background is. You know, I've not tried to find out anything about Robert Robertson. All those men lived in the Charleston area and were probably Quakers. You know, the Quakers had a great influence on the anti-slavery movement in America.
If I don't know if you're Robert Robertson that you're talking about is part of the Nathaniel Robertson family that was prominent in Charlestown, that founded the first Methodist Episcopal Church in Indiana, just north of Charlestown. I mean, that's the Robertson family that I know of up in Charlestown. And
There was a Ruth Robertson that taught at Jeffersonville High School. I think she was a Latin teacher. And I wondered if she was from that family. You know, those are just questions. I remember there was another teacher by the name of Wood. Is there a Wood Township someplace in Clark County?
Yeah,
Borden.
we're sitting in it.
Okay. Well, you know, all those names go back to the early history of Clark County. And I'd like to see their genealogies develop to find out who they were.
To Clark County at Utica, and then there were another family of Woods that came to Borden. Two different families.
Okay.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for coming.
Okay, I think my daughter, I hope she stayed through the meeting from Porter, Texas, and her husband. She just retired from 30 years teaching the 3rd grade down in Texas.
She's not that old, Bill.
Brave
Still
woman.
here, Daddy.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Laura.
Hi, Daddy. We're still here.
Okay.
We need your email address.
Okay, it's EW for Ernest W. Smith, EW Smith 37, year I was born, at gmail.com. If you'll send, I've got 3,000 or 4,000 copies of those brochures. And I got them ready several years ago. They're very attractive brochures. I got them ready because I thought Floyd County would celebrate Davis Floyd and the creation of the county in 1819 in 2019. And I was down in Florida, regretfully, but I found out a lot about Davis Floyd down in Florida. You know where I found out where he died? In the state surveyor's office. They sent me they had a file on Davis Floyd because he was a surveyor in Florida. He was also, believe it or not, he was a charter member and the first president of the Florida Education Society. He was also a charter member of a group of lawyers, the Florida Bible Society, that distributed Bibles in Florida in the 1820s. He also, there was a lawyer in St. Augustine, Achel Marat. Does anybody know who Achel Marat was? He was a lawyer in St. Augustine, 1823.
Napoleon?
Napoleon's nephew, blood nephew. There's a very famous picture of Napoleon with his sister Caroline's children. And one of them is Achel. Achel's wife was a great grandniece of George Washington, a family that lived near Tallahassee that Achel married. Achel was not a very good lawyer. He wasn't a very good citizen, but his wife was a tremendous citizen. And you can visit her home, her plantation home in Tallahassee. I've been there. It's a wonderful restored home. It used to be east of Tallahassee. It's now in Tallahassee. But I found out, I asked a question in Tallahassee. I saw a bar named the Marat Bar. Jehoiakim Marat was a general for Napoleon. And so anyway, they told me, well, it's Achel Marat. I found a book about Achel Marat. I think I got it here someplace. There was also a Jewish man, very rich, that bought 25,000 acres north of the little town of oh gee, got an Indian name. I can't think of. A wonderful little town where Doc Hollywood was filmed. Micanopy. If you ever want to go to Old Florida and you're on I-75 around Gainesville, about 10 miles south, there's a town, Micanopy. It's an Indian name. Micanopy, I'm sorry. Go back in that town. It's like being in Florida 100 years ago. And I thought maybe Davis Floyd was buried there in Micanopy. But this Jewish guy started a plantation, 25,000 acres, and Davis Floyd was his lawyer, and he went back to Europe trying to get Jews to immigrate to his plantation. There was going to be no slavery there. Aaron Burr was against slavery. In fact, the Bastrop colony, he was proposing it to be non-slave. Of course, it came in, the Arkansas territory came in as a slave territory, but that was in 1820. So I think Davis Floyd has a bad name. I think Aaron Burr. Oh, one other thing about Davis Floyd. I went to the American States Papers and I found all of the transcript of the trial in Richmond. There was a man from a young man from Charleston that Davis Floyd recruited to go downriver with Burr and Floyd, wound up in Mississippi, but he gave a deposition in Mississippi that was in the files. It tells from the time they left Jeffersonville until they got arrested down in Washington, Mississippi territory, what was going on. He was on Floyd's boat. He knew everything about what went on. It was 100 men, mostly young men, just looking for adventure. And so much has been distorted about Aaron Burr and about Davis Floyd. It's ridiculous. Okay, any more questions? Oh, I've never read an Aaron Burr biography that talks about the 4 trials or talks about the testimony at the Richmond trial, which is available. Of course, those things mean things to me because I'm a lawyer. I can interpret those things. I was a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer anymore, but
your biography has a link to it from the emails that you all should have received. So you can pull that up and see that. I do not have the brochure out there.
Okay. You know, when Indiana put their motto in the Washington Monument in 1901, what they said, Indiana recognizes no North, no South, only the Union. Now that's inscribed inside the Washington Monument. And I think that pretty well describes what happened in the Indiana Territory and then in 1816 in Cordon. So we got a proud heritage there. We ought to bring back from the Library of Congress those 2 anti-slavery petitions that came from Clark County. But that's my opinion.
Okay. All righty.
1 hour. How's that?
Thanks again. All right. We made it to an hour. All right.
Hey, good night, Laura. I'll talk to you in the morning.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for, I hope you've understood my story, and I'm sorry I'm an old man.
Good night.
Sorry you're an old man. I'm an old lady. But I very much did enjoy your presentation.
Read my biography. Judge Floyd's first murder trial in New Albany in 1821. I found a book written by one of the defense lawyers, published in Jeffersonville in 1821 at the Lilly Library. The defendant was John Dahman. He murdered 2 a German baker at the corner of Pearl and Main Street. He murdered a German watch salesman downriver. He was convicted.
Bible verse that we do.
And the whole book is in the appendix of my biography.
Rename Court Avenue.
Well, yeah, I guess it's a possibility.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night, Bill.
Bye.
Thank you.
I did.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to me. And I'll send that rest of the story to you tomorrow, Bob, and do me the courtesy of sending it out to your membership.
Okay, it won't happen until early next month, but
That's fine. That's fine. Bye, everybody.